We have spent 20, 30 years as a system talking about what we want in education. It is time for us to imagine a system where people of color are centered and are at the table and leading the table to define what kind of education system works, that works for everyone, everyone. I am Trish Malines-Diziko, and I am the co-founder and executive director of the Technology Access Foundation, commonly known as TAF. Way back in 1991-92, when I was in the tech industry, one of the things that I noticed is that, number one, there weren't enough people of color in the industry, which I knew when I entered the industry. But number two, people of color and students of color in particular were not getting the kind of training that they needed to enter the field. So I basically decided to leave the industry and start TAF. When we first started, I funded the organization for the first couple of years with some support from some of our friends. There was a time where we thought, okay, are we doing the right thing? And that time came when we were recruiting kids for our internship program. And it was like, okay, how do we get into the schools? How do we make sure kids understand this opportunity? Because at that time, the World Wide Web was just starting, right? Nobody was programming. Nobody was doing those real technical things in the community that we were trying to get kids to do. Sure enough, though, that first year we had 40 students. That was our target. We barely made it. But after that first year, when everybody heard about it and all of those kids got paid summer internships, all of a sudden, it was like the lines were long, the wait list was long, and we knew we had something. We wanted to create a model where kids could actually work on projects, a project-based learning model, where kids could use their hands and their minds, where they could collaborate, where they can do, take some of those basic rote lessons and learn them in a different way. But we came up with this model for a school that we called TAF Academy.
My TAF journey began, I think, in 2012, and I visited TAF Academy's campus and was just really impressed by what I saw. There's this thing, like, you can feel a school and feel a community when you walk in. And TAF Academy was just warm and it was inviting, and I got to sit down with some of the seniors and juniors at the time and just talk about what they experienced as students on a day-to-day basis and what they liked. And it was just really unique.
My final quarter at Seattle U, Chris Alejano had invited me to go to Starbucks and talk about this little school in Federal Way, which I had never heard of, by the way. I didn't even know it had existed. And he was explaining how they had this summer school program in a STEM environment with project-based learning, with lots of teacher collaboration. And I remember sitting next to Monica, and Monica and I were listening to Chris Alejano and saying, yeah, that school don't exist. I don't know what school you're talking about. That's not what happens in schools. 75 kids in a cohort? Where's that happening? I was used to 150 at a comprehensive high school. Talking about STEM education, again, this is 2011. STEM education wasn't sexy then, it was just regular. That was something that was out there. And at that point also, I was a little bit dismayed with what I saw with education. I didn't think I wanted to stay as a teacher. And I had that meeting with Chris Alejano, and I said, okay, I'll teach summer school for y'all. So I guess I can do that. I mean, I'll try it. And so I went for their final exhibition, and I sat in a seniors class. I saw this boy with a tie. I saw this space filled with community members, with different support systems, with other kids sitting there, taking this young man seriously, and this young man talking about this internship he had done and the steps that we need to take as a community to improve health outcomes. And I said, okay, this is what your school's about, and these little old portables, I guess I can join. And I remember feeling rejuvenated, like, okay, there's a lot more hope in the world. It opened my eyes to what the possibility of school could be like. That school wasn't only these comprehensive high schools that were churning out students, and that as a teacher, you were just trying to put out fire after fire in an inferno. And you could go to this place where you really cultivate students, each one of them individually, to meet their maximum potential.
Thank you for supporting TAF.
Thank you for supporting TAF.
There's a saying, whoever identifies the problem solves the problem. Public education was started by white people. It was designed for white people. And when integration came, Black teachers lost their jobs because they weren't hired. When immigrants came to our country with varying languages, the school system wasn't ready for them. When students came that had varying disabilities or abilities, the school system wasn't ready for them. But they continued to set this measure of achievement called standardized tests to make sure that the people who the school was actually designed for succeeded. Our system judges students starting from 3rd grade based off of that state test that happens in the spring. And from that point on, you're either taking in a high direction or a low direction in your education. We believe that every student has their own genius. And so we set up systems to assess and measure their achievement more on a performative basis, where kids can show their work, where they can demonstrate their work, where they can talk through their work, they can write through their work. However they show that they can meet the standards that we put in front of them. That's how we measure achievement.
I was drawn to TAF Academy. I heard about it through word of mouth. And I was hearing about the small class sizes and about this Black woman who founded the school, and she wanted to focus on minority students. So I had 2 girls who were entering into the Federal Way School District, and I thought it would be a great opportunity. TAF, it empowered them to be more leaders, to take on the responsibility of their own learning, to really ask the question, what are you getting out of this? It taught them to be individual in their thinking, to be diverse in their thinking. I feel like that was the greatest difference between standard public school and TAF Academy.
I think the biggest thing for kids who come from a more traditional background or from a school that's like a standard structure is just the level of independence that they get and sort of the autonomy. They almost don't know what to do with it. Sometimes those new students, they don't know kind of the rhythm of, okay, the teacher has asked a question. Now it is my time to talk, or it's my time to work with my peers to find a solution. And they get confused almost at first. They're like, wait, I have to answer a question? Why aren't you supposed to tell me answers to my question? And my response was always like, no, that's not my job. And kind of helping them through that process of finding voice and finding grounding. It would take like half a year for them to find that rhythm and that comfort to say, I can use my voice in class and that's okay.
Project-based learning, you're gonna have to learn as a teacher. It just don't happen magically. You have to see other people's examples. You have to critique your own work. You have to do this mishmash of what the district, or what your grade level, what your subject's asking you to do. We did things for the kids in the class. We knew who those kids were. We knew their strengths. We knew their families. We knew a little bit about what they thought they wanted to do. And we elevated that through project-based learning. And it was an environment where other teachers would press you and say, that's a great idea. Go elevate that. Go do that. Let me help you out and to make that happen.
By 2012, we had this amazing model. We wanted to replicate it, but there was no funding available because, guess what? Everybody wanted charter schools, and charter schools had just passed, and all of the money, when I say all the money, I mean all of the money went to charter schools. So here we are with this amazing school, with this amazing model, and nowhere for it to go. So we started thinking about how do we take it apart, bits and pieces. We started with teacher training. So what if other teachers could learn to deliver this model in their own school like we are, and we train them to do that? We reduced it down to the essence of the work: project-based learning, STEM integration, education technology, college and career readiness, and all that bundled together in an equitable environment. We look at STEM as a way to ideate, as a way to create, as a way to solve problems and collaborate and use your 21st century skills. We don't see it as learn to be a programmer, learn to be an engineer, because no matter what it is you do, you're gonna need those kind of 21st century skills to be successful. We called the model STEM by Taft because, you know, this is us. And we look at STEM differently.
The STEM by Taft model is based on 4 pillars, and those pillars, while separate, are considered interconnected and they rely on each other. So those pillars are interdisciplinary PBL, or project-based learning, STEM integration, college and career readiness, and educational technologies. All of those pillars are grounded in a foundation of racial equity, and it's kind of our assertion that by using those 4 pillars and using equitable practices in classrooms, that you serve to reduce or eliminate race-based disparities in education. For example, we say and we believe that interdisciplinary PBL is a vehicle for racial justice because it takes away the barriers between different kinds of learning, right? Like we have this mindset where each discipline has to be taught a specific way. So like math has its own set of rules and should never, like you have to learn those in isolation. And same with science and history and the language arts. But interdisciplinary PBL removes those barriers and helps us make connections across every subject area to see how science plays a role in history and the stories that are created in history, and how math has served in a lot of ways as a tool of oppression, and for kids to see that and to be part of and understand that narrative so that they can make those connections across everything to see how the world is interwoven.
So one of the things about the STEM by Taft model is that it hinges on the readiness of adults. It has zero to do with the readiness of students because they're always ready. The challenge we have in our public school systems as a whole is that we prohibit kids or limit kids' learning ability. The only time we let kids be themselves is in kindergarten. The moment they get to first grade, we start stifling their learning. And that is an adult issue. That is not a student issue. So the big thing about the STEM by Taft model is that adults have to be willing to collaborate with each other. They have to be willing to create projects together. If teachers are willing to do that and principals are willing to support them, the number of schools that can run our model is infinite. So we started the Institute, where we brought in teachers from all over to come and learn about our model. And then from Institute, there was one school, Mountview Elementary, who said, we want our whole school to be this way. And that's how STEM by Taft School Transformation was born.
My name is Ann Balala. I work at Bose Elementary School. I've been there for 28 years. I'm starting my 29th year there. I first heard about the possibility of working with Taft from my principal. We sort of put our heads together and did a little bit of research on who Taft was. And after all of our questions had been answered, we ended up taking a vote. So that first year, we came to 4 days at BCLS. Those 4 days were spent in a project-based model. We learned, like our students would learn, putting together a project, planning our first projects for that first year. It was a shift in thinking how you teach. Instead of pulling out your book and saying, okay, now I'm gonna do reading, and pulling out your math book and saying, okay, now I'm gonna do math, and pulling out your social studies or science and saying, okay, now it's science time. You have to find a way of a project that will cover all of those things and pull all of those things together. That's hard. That's hard.
I think the hardest adjustment for teachers who come into the model and start working with us, a lot of times is they don't know what it looks like. They haven't seen it. A lot of times teachers join teaching and become teachers because they believe in the idea of equity. So they're kind of like starting there. But PBL is just this very ambiguous thing to them. One of the things I always tell teachers when I'm working with them and they're learning is, and we show them examples, obviously, and then as they're going, they're like, I don't know how I'm gonna do this, and I don't know if it's gonna have the right outcome. And I just tell them that when you get through the first one, which is gonna be hard and you're gonna make mistakes, it is okay, but it's gonna be really hard for you to argue with the results. You're gonna see engagement and you're going to see kids showing their work and talking about what they've learned in ways that you probably haven't seen.
It really changed our whole community, you know? The kids started to think differently about how they access their learning. Rather than sit and get, they were much more collaborative about their learning. They started to feel like they could have a voice in how they learn things.
There's this one story of a teacher that one of our coaches told where it was just after their first exhibition and he comes back into the room after all the kids have gone home and he kind of like falls on the floor, exhausted, but like gets up and says, okay, like what are we doing the next one? And it's really indicative of it's tiring, it takes time, it takes energy, but it fuels you.
We couldn't have done without our transformation coaches. They were the ones with the knowledge about PBL. They were available all the time to our teachers and our students.
Being an instructional coach is really about working with teachers and transforming classrooms. It is beautiful work to work with students, but to really transform schools, it cannot just be your one classroom where you're making this wonderful change. You have to be willing to be brave to go into classrooms that are really tough where teachers feel like things are impossible, where kids feel like things are hopeless, and you have to be able to be willing to change that dynamic. And that's what I do as an instructional coach on the most extreme end. On the other end, I'm also a person who can affirm that your practices are doing exactly what you need to do, that the things that you are doing for kids are helping them in all of these ways that you cannot see.
STEM by Taft School Transformation Program is a 5-year program. So what happens after 5 years? So for those first 5 years, we provide a full-time instructional coach and a team of people to help transform the school. And once the school has passed that 5 years, our theory is that they are ready to run that school on their own, that they become a part of a broader network of support where they can get support from other folks who have gone through the transition, and they schedule time with us to come in for tune-ups. So Bose Elementary is at that place right now.
I would love to have Taft with us all the time, every year, but knowing that we're still in their network and we're still part of the family, so to speak, is good to know. We can still reach out.
So being a coach was not about my classroom, not about one classroom. It was about teachers recognizing the journey that they would have to take in all of these massive ideals that Taft stands for. We are about project-based learning, about STEM education, we're about ed tech, we're about equity. And every person has to go on their own journey and understand how they do that and translate that for the kids in front of them and get their kids to own that, for them to think outside of just their standards, their text, the content that they have to cover, and realize how they can bring the world into their classroom and get the world that the kids see is reflective of what the kids actually are living. And that's what I do as an instructional coach, is really push at those ideals and get people to dig in and take that journey.
One of the things that has kept us thriving in good times and bad is our North Star, our kids. Nobody wants to fail and fail our children. And we're okay with failing forward, as they call it, right? You fail a little bit, you learn from it, you change things a little, and you keep going. But to shut our doors was not really an option. Nobody else was going to do this work. 10 years in, nobody else still was doing this work. So it felt like this heavy load on our shoulders. Just continuing to beat the bushes for funding, to get our story out there, to get people to connect to the story, to make sure that we have a level of support that will help us continue our work. We've limped along a few times in our history, but every single time we came out on the other side, because our focus has always been number one, children.
My name is DM Lee. I'm the Director for Community Impact for Comcast NBC Universal. And the way that I'm connected to Taft is I'm actually Trish's adopted niece. I can give you a real answer too if you like.
That wasn't real?
She has claimed me as her Vietnamese niece. The real answer is I'm a corporate sponsor for Taft going back about 7 years now. The way that I heard about Taft is just through really word of mouth. I was curious about organizations that had really impactful work in the STEM or STEAM focus areas, and learned about Taft pretty quickly. And it just started with sponsoring some of their STEM fairs, right? Essentially Taft's version of a science fair. And we were so impressed with the talent of the students, this untapped potential, that we would go back to Taft every year and try to figure out what can we do differently. And if you fast forward a couple of years later, we came up with this crazy idea of a hackathon with a cause. And that was called the Comcast Innovation Challenge. And that was really a way for us to figure out how can we include our employees at Comcast and take them out into the community, have them engage with TAF students.
Having professionals come into your school when you're in the middle of projects was the best thing when you're trying to figure out what you want to do. Even when you don't know what you want to do in a project or for your job or how to study, having professionals constantly coming in and you can ask endless questions was amazing. I've never in my life had as many people come up to me and ask me, what do you want to know? Do you have any questions? And they constantly push me to think more and actually actively think outside of, this is school, yeah, we get it, but what do you want to do? How are you exactly going to do this?
I would say TAF showed me the different career opportunities as far as like what I could do with STEM, but I didn't really know what STEM was before I went to TAF. Like, it was always think outside the box, and if you were thinking in the box, it was a problem, you know? So just kind of helping me recognize, you know, that you can do anything, you know, like you don't have to, all you have to do is sit and learn how to do it, you know? But TAF was just like, if you wanna do it, just go do it. So that's when I realized, you know, that was just their mentality as a school.
Often people want to know why TAF is successful, particularly why we're successful with communities of color. And that's because we intentionally hire people who come from the communities that we serve or similar communities that we serve. 2014, I pull up in the parking lot of our building. I get a call from Holly Martinez, who runs the Martinez Foundation that she and her husband Edgar started. And she said, Trish, Edgar and I are going to fold the foundation, but we want the fellowship work to continue. Will TAF take it? I immediately said yes, but of course I had to ask my board. 4 months later, we were the proud owners of the Martinez Fellowship Program, which is focused on getting teachers of color into Washington State Public Schools by partnering with our local private and public universities who have College of Ed programs and making sure that we support those teachers getting their certification while they're getting their certification, and then 3 years as they go into teaching.
My name is Julia Rodriguez. I am a 4th grade teacher in Lakewood, Washington. I was introduced to TAF by joining the Martinez Fellowship for Educators. I always really enjoyed school. I was an A student and loved all my teachers. Because of that, I grew up knowing, man, I really want to be a teacher. And I really wanted to create an environment for students that was like the one that I had. I knew I belonged in the classroom.
I remember when I got accepted, the dean had called me at the time, and she had told me how much money was in the scholarship, and she told me all of these wonderful opportunities, and then she gave me Edgar Martinez's address and said, show up for brunch, and I was like, are you joking? And I was outside playing with my niece at the time. I think that was one point in my life where I knew my life was just completely turned around, that doors were gonna open for me, and that this was the right career for me.
What Martinez has really given me is a space to come back to remind me why I'm doing this. It's more than the kids, it's more than for your own career. You are, as an educator of color, making space for the next teacher to come in, for the kid in the classroom that is interested in being a teacher.
And then the Martinez Fellowship, I think, is unique in that you follow people when in the inception of their career and they grow with you. And so in that very beginning stage, there were things about the classroom management. There were things about unit planning, of including more voices of color and transforming practice that was more equitable, things that are right now really famous, that everybody wants to jump on. And that exposure is rare. You don't get that when you're working within a district. A district doesn't provide that for you, that level of experience, that expertise that's beyond just your district or beyond your school walls. I was meeting teachers who were experiencing these things across the Puget Sound and learning and transforming my own practice because of the experiences of these wonderful fellows that were around me and the wonderful people that the Martinez Fellows brought into my life.
We've been breaking ground in everything we do. People said, no, don't do school partnership, do a charter school because you have fire and hire control. And I'm like, if you hire the people right in the first place, why do you need to keep hiring and firing people? Don't work with public education. Change your outcomes and make sure that your outcomes show that your kids have turned the corner on poverty for their family. We're not poverty pimps. And I've actually turned away money. I probably have turned away millions of dollars because a funder said, we want these kind of outcomes. And I look at that as like, that's not who we are. We're not gonna focus on getting test scores to go through the roof. Because what does that prove in terms of how our kids are learning? What does it prove on what our kids know? When you come to work at TAF, the non-negotiable is that number one, you bring your authentic self to the program, no drama, and that you put kids first.
This ain't regular public school, boo. This is TAF at Sahalee. This is a TAF school. We want teachers who are superstars, who are willing to collaborate, open their practice, and willing to examine whether or not what they're doing is effective for the kids in front of them.
When I first started at TAF, I hated reading. Like, I would not read out loud ever because I was that slow of a reader and I'd mess up a lot of my words. When I first came in as that kind of student, the teacher, of course, the year I come in, the teacher I get was Mr. Umali.
Johnny's one of my favorite students. I got a lot of favorite students, so don't y'all be jealous after you watch this little video clip, all right? But here's what I remember about Johnny when I was a summer school teacher in my very first month there at TAF. He hid behind my table when he had to present.
And he was not about to let it slide. That one kid in particular did not read out loud at all.
He was so deathly afraid to present his work. I remember thinking about that and saying, what you so ashamed of? Like, open yourself up to the criticism, open yourself up to growing. So you gotta go, as a teacher, you gotta put that in your mind and you're like, okay, I'm gonna find opportunities for you, Johnny. Johnny hated to read, Johnny hated to write. My job was to teach Johnny how to read and write. And I kept trying to find another opportunity for a kid just like him and other kids like him where they were gonna feel like, I'm making just a little bit of gain. I'm making this much more gain, and always was pointing that out to kids like, hey, look, you had grown another reading level. Congratulations. Let's go to the next level.
Project-based learning at TAF was amazing. I definitely wasn't easy to work with at first, but every project I learned, I grew, and I started to realize I'd usually take a leadership role, and I don't know how it happens. It usually just naturally happens. And it got to the point where every project, they would announce the roles you have to take, and there's always that leadership role, and all my partners usually it's a vote. My partners would always vote me. Those projects were so rewarding because I know that I'm a leader now. I know that I can work with other people, and I know whenever a project comes up for college, I'm ready.
By the time he had left, he wasn't scared to share his work. He was willing to write, and he was willing to help other people write. He really internalized that. All he needed was somebody to just say, you're doing great, keep going. Look, I am pointing out every which way that you are doing things correct. And that's what you're supposed to do as a really good teacher. Point out what they can do, where they can grow, and just help move them along the way.
The cool thing about TAF is that it worked for all three of my children. One who is an extrovert, wanted to cheer, she wanted to participate in outside activities. One who was solely focused on STEM, wanted to build robots, wanted to learn more about community, and then one who wanted to just put his head in the computer. So it worked for all of them. So my first daughter, Alicia, she started TAF Academy in the 9th grade. For my daughter, it was a little rough because the school was small. The focus was on her. After she saw the attention that she was receiving, after she saw how it would benefit her, because again, she's only in 9th grade. 9th graders fight everything. It was smooth sailing from there. But the reason for my daughter Ayana attending was also the small class sizes, but she wanted to focus more on STEM. And her learning was a little different. At first, when we were in the Federal Way School District before, when she was younger, they tried to say, well, maybe she's ADHD. They tried to put her on the spectrum. And so when we came to TAF, it just fit. My children have had some amazing teachers at TAF Academy, and I'm getting teary just thinking about it. My daughter had an art teacher, Tabby Eberhardt. This is Ayana. This is one that learned a little different. And she kind of took her in and she taught my daughter. She didn't teach her anything. She brought things out of her that she didn't know were in her. Tabby Eberhardt brought art out of my daughter. She didn't know she could draw. And she's so talented in the way she expresses herself. So not just art and drawing, art in her speaking, and being confident about her art. A teacher can't be taught that, how to pull things out of students. That's passion that comes from within.
Schools and spaces that serve Black and brown students oftentimes are either not given the resources or the freedom to kind of make these spaces and make positive learning environments possible for their students in the same way. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that these kinds of tools like ed tech or high-end ed tech, PBL, STEM, have often been reserved for affluent white schools. And it has a lot to do with where resources are being put. A lot of the times these schools are also underperforming according to standardized measures, right? And so if they're underperforming, they need different tools or they're not ready for that, right? It's kind of this argument that if they were doing better academically, then they would be ready for this kind of high quality stuff or this kind of, I guess they call it enrichment. It is our assertion that those aren't enrichments, that those are core, that things like high quality STEM and project-based learning aren't additions for learning. They are the basis of learning and they are the pieces that make learning most possible.
I learned about the Fred Hutch internship. It was a program that was designed to teach students, like underrepresented students, how to do certain lab procedures and expose them to research. Initially, what I started doing was just learning how to do basic things like synthesizing DNA, duplicating the DNA, trying to see how much DNA is in a certain object, you know, getting rid of genes, bringing genes back in, things like that. And then my third year, I did my senior project there, and what I was studying was GVHD, which is graft versus host disease, so where you take stem cells from one person and put them into another person. So the first 2 years you kind of learn the basics, and then if you continue to be enrolled in the program, you get to do your own sort of research that you're interested in specifically. The number one thing I take away from the internship was, like, you're never limited. That's the thing I learned, was you're not really limited ever by what you're able to learn. You just kind of go out and learn it.
TAF at Sahalee is at a point where teachers are solidifying what the TAF practices are there. As I look at it, it is teachers examining critically whether or not the curriculum or the pace of the curriculum matches the needs of the kids. I see us as a school transforming into more interdisciplinary work, which is something that is bucking against some trends in education now. I see us embracing this idea that we do not push kids out, we bring them in. When you have a kid who is furthest from educational justice, that kid is not gonna be the easiest kid. That kid's not just gonna embrace classroom or school or any system. You have to transform your practice to embrace that kid. And that is what TAF at Sahalee is doing now. I see TAF at Sahalee now as a place where if you are a teacher, you are going to be critical and reflective about what's happening in the world today and how are you going to bring that part of the world into the classroom.
We are consistently delivering a high quality education to students who have been marginalized for generations in our public schools. We are doing something that's very different. We are doing it in partnership with our schools, not instead of our schools. And that's what makes it effective. We have a track record of success, like true success for our students. Generational change is what we're looking for in any type of philanthropy, and TAF provides it.
To see the evolution of TAF has been really exciting, and I look forward to seeing how much more it evolves and changes not just itself, but it's changing the community and it's changing the schools around it because other people wanted to know what TAF does. I'm grateful for it, because it not only bettered my children, but it also bettered me.
Students are always changing. Teaching is always changing. STEM by TAF will always be changing as well. We'll always have to be working on it. But I think that this collaborative PBL way is a good thing for kids.
There's always something new that TAF is doing and adding on in the pursuit of its mission of racial justice in educational spaces. I don't know, I think there's just a lot of possibility.
You know, you'll hear people say, there isn't enough minority talent. There isn't enough of a diverse pool out there for us to hire into these industries, into this company. And that's not true, because the talent is there. It's just we need to support them and make sure that there's a pipeline for them to be a part of the same companies, industries, organizations that we are. And so for the few of us who are in a position in which to create that pipeline, that opportunity for them, that's our responsibility. We should do that.
I want you to imagine that in every school district in Washington State, there are at least 3 schools running the STEM by TAF model, where these kids and these teachers are getting the kind of education that they deserve. I want you to imagine every school in Washington State having teachers of color in their schools, representative of the population of students of color in their schools. I want you to imagine an entire education system where students have voice and they have choice, regardless of whether TAF had an impact on it or not, because we are all part of one giant education ecosystem. We have spent 20, 30 years as a system talking about what we want in education. It is time for us to imagine a system where people of color are centered and are at the table to define what kind of education system works for everyone. People of color, people with learning disabilities, people with English language learning challenges, people who are poor regardless of their race. It has to work for everybody. And in order for this to happen, we all have to be on the same page. We got to get out of our silos and come together as adults because our kids are counting on us. So work with us in this work. Work with us as we partner with public schools to create the kind of public schools that 90% of our kids attend that work for them.